Welcome to the Being Known podcast with my friend, Dr. Curt Thompson.
And my friend, Pepper Sweeney.
We are here to discover and explore what it means to be truly known. And today we are starting season 5 of the Being Known podcast. And it just makes me laugh because, come on. I mean, how did we get here?
I know. It's hard and beautiful to imagine.
Yeah.
Yeah, right on.
Yeah. My brutal and beautiful. That's not an original, by the way. I heard that one somewhere.
Oh.
So in season 5,
Mm-hmm.
what we have decided to do is, similarly to season 4, we are going to be exploring Curt's book, one of Curt's books, and this one is The Soul of Shame, Curt's second book. And I want to talk about why we're doing this a little bit. So, you wrote this book, or this book was released in 2015, I believe.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
2015.
Yep.
And as I say, a lot of ink has been spilled about shame. And of course, we have obliquely talked about it in our podcast over the seasons, a little bit here and there. So why are we still talking about it? Why is it important for us this season to be, other than maybe selling a few books for you,
Right.
Why would we be doing this season on shame?
Well, I think it's to give you an opportunity in the first place to use the word obliquely. And so I think that's
that's a $10 word.
Dude, that was beautiful.
Thank you.
That was beautiful. That wasn't even brutal. That was beautiful.
Beautiful.
It's beautiful. We were talking before the show, and I have this thought of like, well, this book was written then. We, as you rightly say, a lot of ink has been spilled. People talk about it. We should be so familiar with it now that we shouldn't need to have to talk about it. And as it turns out, not least even in the last month, it has become so apparent to me that it continues to be pernicious and malignant. It continues to be something that we can never take our eye off of. We can never assume that we've figured it out. We know that it is a weapon that evil uses. And now that we know that, and now that we have all the information that we need to have, we no longer have to worry about it, have to think about it. We kind of have that packaged and wrapped. And it just isn't the case.
Right.
And as you've rightly said, we have included it in a number of different ways and places in our previous seasons. We've never really taken the opportunity to, drill down deeply into it in some of the ways that we do in the book. And I want to invite our audience to know that this could be easily, we could easily do this season like on, press record, rewind, repeat, every so many seasons, because it is never going to stop being a thing. Not just like in our world, but it doesn't stop in my own head.
Right.
It just and for some things that I think, okay, now I know I have this shame thing around this particular item in my life. Okay, and now I know that. And the fact that I know that doesn't 6 months from now doesn't keep it from feeling that much as nauseous then as it did when I first discovered it and figured out we would have it all sorted out.
Right. And you talked about, you wrote about in chapter 1, which we'll get to. You wrote about how, we want to have this surgically removed. We want to just cut this out and be done with it. Yeah. And that's not the way it works. There's a whole other way, a whole other amount of work that needs to be done to deal with it, because it's not going to go away.
Right. We talk. As I've said, we run these confessional communities in our practice, And some of these communities have been meeting together for close to 5 years, and they know each other really well, and they've done a ton of work building a connection and community. And there are stories that many of these people told for the first time 5 years ago that continue to haunt them. And not because they haven't done work. They're not in the same place with their stories as they were 5 years ago. But evil is just not going to let up. And it will, you think that you've sealed off that particular crack in the bathroom wall so the water's not going to go through there. It's going to find another way in. It's going to come for us. And so we see in the day-to-day work with patients, it continues to be this thing. In when I was in medical school, we took a pathology course, and the pathology course was the only course that lasted the entire duration of our first 2 years of school. You started it and it went the entire 2 years. No other course was that long. And of course, it's like, well, no wonder, because there's so much to know about what the problem is. And the first chapter of this thick pathology textbook was the inflammatory response. This notion that when the body senses something wrong with it in some way, shape, or form, the inflammatory response is the kind of ubiquitous thing. It is the thing that happens no matter if you have a brain tumor, if you have an infection, if you have an autoimmune disease, if you have surgery. The body is ready to marshal its inflammatory response. It is basic. It is fundamental to everything else that follows in pathology. And which is why we spend so much time, coming to know it. But that's the thing. It is so common that we can get to a point where we stop thinking about it. And that's kind of how shame has kind of emerged in my mind. It is part of the inflammatory response. It is a signal. And I think that, we'll talk about this over time. Like, in and of itself, it is a signal response that's telling us that there's something wrong. It's telling us that there's a separation between us and others, us and ourselves. The question is what we do in response to it. We know that, like the inflammatory response, it is everywhere, all the time, large ways, small ways. It is deceptive. It is relentless. And we have to continually identify where it is and drive it out where it seeks to do violence. And, just basically, when people ask me this question, well, Curt, is ever there a place where shame serves a proper purpose? Like, if we just got rid of all shame, isn't that going to be a problem? We say, well, absolutely. There are certain forms of human behaviors for which shame absolutely is the proper response. There are things that we do. If I mistreat you, if I criticize Phyllis, my wife, if I speak sharply to her in public, speak sharply to her, like, there might be a certain shame that I would feel. She would certainly feel it. I would feel it. And like, I should feel ashamed about that.
Yes, you should, she shouldn't.
Right.
In that situation. Yeah.
Right. But she does too, because I'm directing my,
I almost think there should be a different word for that, shame.
Right. Well, so yeah, I mean, there should be. I mean, St. Paul takes us there when he says in 2 Corinthians 7, verse 10, when he says, there is a godly grief that leads to repentance.
Yeah.
And there is an ungodly grief that leads to death. And we're going to get into that. But what he's saying is, like, when something happened, that when I've done something and shame arises in me as a proper response to what I've done, the question immediately becomes, what do I do in response to that? A godly response is a response in which I repent, right? I'm going to turn around and move toward relationship. And as we'll see later, it's hard to do when it comes to shame.
Right.
It's really hard to do. But most of the time, what I tend to do is I don't repent. I don't turn toward relationship. I don't own my behavior and stand in and tolerate the difficulty of what I feel with shame. Instead, I turn and leave. And it is in the leaving that shame is actually strengthened, which we'll talk more about. And of course, when I leave, I reduce pretty quickly my felt sense of shame because I don't have to see you seeing me. And it's in that way we say that, like, we'll talk about this notion of violence, right? People think shame, people don't think about violence, but shame is an act of violence, of a violation. I violate someone else, I violate myself, and we'll talk more about that again as we go through these chapters. But what it does, it becomes kind of like a chameleon. Brene Brown talks about it. John Bradshaw talked about it now 30 years ago. John Bradshaw wrote the book Healing the Shame That Binds You. And and that book sold millions of copies, and you'd think, my goodness, we not only know everything we need to know about shame from that book, but we can also appropriate what we need to, we can implement what we need to do, and we'll have a proper response to it. No. The phrase rope-a-dope, right?
Yeah.
That Muhammad Ali made famous, right? This sense that he can just kind of like lean on the ropes, and when people are pummeling him, he's letting the ropes take the punishment so that his body doesn't have to, and he just wears his opponent out. And that's kind of like what shame does to us. It plays rope-a-dope with us. Like, okay, now we're going to have this podcast, and we're going to talk about it, and we're going to name it. We're going to come for it, and we're going to pummel. We're going to do what we need to do, and it's going to fade into the woodwork, and it will find our listeners. It's going to find you and me. It's going to find Amy. It's going to find us. It'll find me this afternoon. Yeah. We will have had this conversation, and it will find me this afternoon at some point.
Yeah. As I was, preparing for today's podcast, and I read the book years ago, and then, started reading it again as I was preparing for this. And it just is amazing how impactful it was for me just to read these first couple of chapters, because it's like, I'm just reminded of all the things that I've kind of, that are hidden in there, and that are, I've been ignoring, and I've not been paying enough attention to, and I've been hiding those things,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that, it's easy. We talk about shame here. We are, we're talking about this kind of abstract topic, and we'll discover pretty quickly that it's nothing abstract at all. It's a very, very physically experienced thing. But also, it's important for our listeners to know that at the same time that shame is a phenomenon in and of itself, that its effect is really to shape the stories that we tell, shape the stories that we are living in. So we're not going to be just talking about the mechanics of shame, neurobiologically, interpersonally, but we're going to come to recognize that shame is embedded within each of our stories. It's gonna show up. We were talking earlier today about, we have this little nonprofit, the Center for Being Known. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as our season proceeds. And the Center for Being Known is this thing that has kind of emerged organically. It's kind of like these different parts of it that are coming together. It's not like I had some grand vision, 10 years ago, and this is what we're going to do. It's all very plainly spelled out in my mind or other people's mind and so forth. And along the way, I haven't, the whole notion of leading an organization or starting and running a nonprofit, that is not my gifting. And so I've made mistakes, and I've hurt people's feelings along the way, not because I don't care, but because I think I'm trying to do what I'm supposed to do, and then I end up doing silly things. But I'm not clear about things, or I don't say what I want, all the things. Like, there's 100 different ways in which I don't do this very well. And it just continues to come back. And it's not just about this nonprofit. It is about, what do I believe is true about who I am from the very beginning? And that organization, for instance, is just one place in which my story is emerging, and where shame wants to jump into the driver's seat of the bus and start to take over where the story is going. But also, we want to recognize that as much as it's embedded in each of our own individual stories, and then it becomes embedded in who we are, even as not just my story, but the story, for instance, of my family. Right? How many of us have certain stories, certain members in our family? We don't want to talk about Uncle George. We don't want to talk about Bruno. This thing that happened. Right.
Yeah. We don't talk about Bruno.
Right.
Yeah.
those things that happened 3 generations ago or 4 generations ago that where there's so much shame, someone who took their life, but we don't talk about that. You know, I remember my mother had an older brother who took his life. This was before I was born. Who took his life. He was discovered by his child. Discovered by his child, by his son.
Mm.
And there's no way that doesn't have impact. But it was never talked about. It was never talked about. Like that kind of thing is like it's embedded in not just my personal story, but like it's embedded in somebody else's story that now trickles down to me, now becomes part of my story, perhaps even in ways I'm carrying shame that belongs to other parts of my story that I don't even know. But here's the thing, Pat, that I want our listeners to know. We each are part of this larger story, capital S. This story of the gospel, this story of the biblical narrative, this story in which God himself made the world in such a way that shame is part of it. Like, it's not like God made the world and somehow evil inserted shame as part of what's happening. No, this is all part of what God has inserted. And God himself is not going to allow a thing that he has created to be in charge ultimately of the story that God is telling. And this is the really, really good news. As I say to folks, the news about shame is far worse than you know. And it is far better than you can imagine. And we really want people to know that as far as the far worse than we know is concerned, we recognize that this is really a project on evil's side of the equation, where evil, its role, it doesn't just want us to use shame to make us feel bad about ourselves. It wants to devour us. We've talked on this podcast before, this notion that we want to be truly known in order for us to be agents and outposts of creating beauty and goodness in the world. And as much as anything, evil can't tolerate the notion of us creating beauty and goodness, especially in relationships, especially relationships where there's been ruptures, where shame has been at work keeping those relationships separate. Evil can't tolerate the notion that we are going to face the shame in order to heal, in order to repair the rupture, in order for beauty and goodness to emerge. No, evil wants to devour us. And so we also discover that there are many layers of life to pay attention to when it comes to this topic, not just the mechanics, but the story that's being told in the process about that. So we recognize that we're going to develop over the course of our time in this season, we're going to develop a strategy, an overarching vision for how we understand it. We're eventually going to develop a set of tactics for how we approach shame, what we do in response to it. We're going to recognize that shame is not something, as you said earlier, like it's not something that we can extricate from our lives. We can't surgically remove it so that it never shows up again. We're going to learn how to have a different relationship with it, such that we put that voice to death. You know, it often strikes me that, you know, this notion that, I think we've said this on this podcast before, that the Romans had lots of ways to kill people and to do it quickly. But crucifixion, to crucify someone would mean people could die within hours. Sometimes it would take people days to die. And one of the reasons why crucifixion is such an apt representation for what it means for us to put our old men and women to death, those old parts of us, those old parts where shame is in charge of the storytelling narrative. It takes a long time to do it, just like crucifixion. And it requires a great deal of work. So like we were saying at the top of this episode, this notion that, like, gosh, how many times I have this one story of a person in one of our confessional communities who, not that long ago, it was just remarking, this is a person who has really worked really hard. And anybody who knows this person in the group has just watched this person do amazing stuff differently over the last 4 to 5 years in their own personal life, in response to their family, and their family is like, it's a really broken place, and it continues to be really, really broken. And this person is just about the only person from their family of origin that is actually doing any kind of work. But they've been working for a long time, and not that long ago, they were commenting, it was just really kind of becoming overwhelming because the family once again had done something that had really activated and really wounded this person once again, because the family just keeps behaving badly.
Right.
And this person was kind of overwhelmed with a sense of grief that, like, why do I still respond like this? And so not only were they having this felt sense of grief in response to the way the family had behaved badly again, but they were having this surge of shame because they were still having that response. And so we had to pause, and we had to say, this is exactly what evil wants to do to you even right now. Evil wants to turn your attention toward and to turn your thoughts toward, I'm just not effective at this. I've been working at this for over 2 decades. I'm like there's got to be something wrong with me, that over 2 decades of work, and this is all that I had to show for it. And of course, this is, as we'll see, right, my capacity for seeing what beauty and goodness I have created. I suddenly, I can't see it, I can't hear it, which is why we need a community to remind us of this. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that, just, as I know we'll talk about, shame begets shame begets shame. And, I want joy to beget joy to beget joy, if you want to know the truth. Right. And you got to work harder for that. And yeah. Therein lies one of the big pieces of the problem is, it's so prevalent and feeds on itself.
Yeah.
I'm ashamed that I'm ashamed that I'm ashamed. Yeah.
Right. And I think that, evil is banking on our losing track of it. Okay. We're recording this in late May, and this is an offshoot story, but I've over the years, because of my very, very good friend, Jeff Dudiak, who's a professor of philosophy in Edmonton, Ontario. He's from Canada, where they learn to ice skate before they can walk. And many, many years ago, Jeff really personally introduced me to professional hockey, to the NHL.
Okay.
And it's the hockey playoffs. And I'm like glued to the TV watching these hockey playoffs, because for my mind, there are a lot of beautiful sports in the world and that are beautiful for lots of different reasons. But I don't know a sport that combines power, grace, speed, agility, and the occasional fist fight quite like hockey does. And I'm watching Edmonton and Calgary last night, and there's this one play where Calgary scores because there was one player who got the puck in one part of the offensive zone, and they passed the puck, and the person who was charged with defending against them kind of lost track of where they were. And this person very silently and quietly, all the action moves to the other side of the rink. And it's all going, but this person just kind of quietly comes in and steps right in front of on the weak side of the net. He's just kind of standing there, and it's clear the guy who was charged with defending him wasn't paying close attention. And before you know it, zip, zip, the pass of the puck comes across the ice, and there he stands. He just pokes it right in the net because somebody wasn't paying attention to him. And this is what evil is counting on. And we cannot lose our man. We can't lose track of this, because they're going to poke the puck into the net. This is what they're going to do. They're waiting for the evil is looking. Evil is not a passive recipient. They don't just there's an opportunity. I'll take. No, they are creating opportunities for things to happen. And this is part of the thing, right? Even in that game, there is a certain offensive intentional strategy where we're going to move the puck to one side of the rink to this is where we're going to create all the activity for the very purpose of setting up the opportunity of one
Right.
person to very silently come in and just stand out, hang out by the net. And you don't even remember that he's there until boom, they score.
Right.
Yeah. Real quick, a couple of things. We've said already that there is a proper place for shame, and so we want to say that at the outset. That our conversation over the course of our time together is not going to be just about kind of hammering away at shame as if shame in and of itself is always and only bad. We know that there are proper places and appropriate and ways to appropriate shame in our lives. It is equally true that a lot of the behavior that we commit as human beings, for which shame is the proper response, a lot of that behavior actually emerges out of shame in the first place. So, someone asked me once, well, if we were to eliminate shame, wouldn't we just like start behaving badly all over the place because nobody would be ashamed of doing it? And I would say, well, perhaps, but all that bad behavior that we're afraid that we would start to commit actually emerges so much of the time. It emerges as a way for me to cope with the shame that I'm holding inside anyway. And so that's just as a caveat. And then the other question that sometimes has come up is this notion that there are different kinds of cultures that operate in different ways. That we have what we would call like a shame and honor culture. This is often understood to be the case in the Middle East and the Far East, Eastern cultures. And it's often considered that cultures in the West pay a lot more attention to this thing that we call guilt. And how do those things, how does that differentiate? In other words, how does the culture itself shape our experience of shame and so forth? And in the book, as I write, I'm not trying to address the cultural elements of this, but one thing I think that we can say is that every culture, whether you're in the U.S. or you're in Japan or you're in Saudi Arabia, every culture has a way of experiencing shame, and we respond to it. And we would also say that shame can become systematized. It can become utilized and manipulated. We're going to use shame as a culture to shape, our culture members in certain ways. And every culture does that to some degree. I think what's going to be more important is for us to recognize that developmentally, and we'll talk about this in a little more detail later, developmentally, shame emerges earlier than guilt does. It requires a more sophisticated brain for a child to comprehend and have some kind of experience with the thing that we call guilt. Our responses to guilt and shame are different. When I feel guilty, I can move towards someone to seek restitution, to seek help, to make sure that we're okay. Shame tends to turn me away from people. So what we want to say is that I can have shame without guilt, but if I have guilt, that shame is underneath all that. And this is why we can misbehave, and we can go to a person and we can genuinely apologize and repent, and they can forgive us, and we feel like we're in a better space. But the next day we wake up and we're thinking about what we did and we still feel bad. And we might say, well, I still feel guilty. And I say, oh, no, that's actually shame that's still at work. Because in the course of how we are responding to these kinds of things, evil is going to use the most primal, the most fundamental neurophysiologic action that we have access to really, again, to run us over and to devour us. Evil isn't just interested in making us feel bad about ourselves. It's really looking for ways to disrupt and devour and keep us from creating beauty and goodness in the world.
Yeah. Curt, I'm really very excited about this season that we have in front of us. Revisiting this book for me already has opened my eyes to a few things and reminded me of a few things. And, you wrote the book you released the book in 2015, but unfortunately its contents are evergreen because we're going to be dealing with this. And it's something that you either you either deal with or it deals with you.
Yeah.
So I I think that we typically have an application that we give people, or you give people after every episode, but I think it's appropriate for me to give the application this week. And
Yeah.
what I want to do is I want to say, here's your assignment.
Hmm.
I want you to get the book, if you don't already have it, The Soul of Shame, Dr. Curt Thompson. And I want you to read the first chapter this week so that you are ready to dig in with us next week. And we, what's going to be really, really awesome about this season is these podcast episodes are going to coincide with the chapters in the book and work as a companion to the book that, if you've read the book before, you didn't have access to Curt like you do now to hear him talk about his writing. And then we'll do applications and we'll give you practical things that you can do to start doing this work. And I just really want to encourage you, if you don't already have the book, it's readily available out there. This little guy on the book cover, by the way, it's ingenious. I mean, it just embodies the feeling of shame.
The artists at IBP, the people who designed this, they won an award for this cover.
As well they should. I think it's fantastic.
I just yeah. And in some respects, just to jump on that, it's simple in its design. Yeah. It's very simple in its design. And that's exactly what shame is. Like, shame doesn't have to come at you with lots of complicated stuff. It comes at you very simply, but it just never stops coming at you.
Right. Okay. I'm ready to take on this.
Right on, bro.
I think I'm ready. I got a feeling some things are going to come up, but okay. All right. So if you are watching us on YouTube, we're going to be joined by our producer, Amy, and we're going to do our post-show conversation. If you're listening to us, head over to YouTube, subscribe. If you are a listener of this podcast, please subscribe and rate and review us. It helps us to be more known out there, which is always a good thing. I think that the more people that get to hear from Dr. Curt Thompson, the better the world's going to be. So thank you, Curt. Thanks for this day. I love you, buddy.
Thanks, Pep, man. Love you too. Great to be with you again.
You too.
So this week I didn't have to, but I chose to install a new toilet paper roll holder.
I like how we're getting right after it here.
We're going to get to shame. Yeah. We're going to get
to
shame.
But can you say that phrase quickly again? Toilet paper roller holder? Is that what?
No, I can probably say it, but
I can't say it.
Roll holder. Holder. No, I can't say it. Toilet paper roll holder.
Okay. Yeah, just install one.
And it required putting an anchor in. Now, people that don't like to build things, you put this little thing in the wall so that the screw can go in and it can actually support it. So I didn't have the exact drill bit that I needed for the anchor. So I
wait. Can I just say for our audience who doesn't know, like, you're a BA construction worker. I mean, like, you are.
I do love building things.
You build things, right?
I do love building things.
Yeah.
But I made the wrong decision. I used the drill bit that was a little bit bigger than I needed.
Yeah.
So then I put the anchor in and it just still flies into the wall. So I'm like, okay, this is not working.
I think we need a bigger anchor.
Now we need a bigger toilet paper roll holder.
Yeah.
But it hit me because at the beginning, like season 1, I forget, we were doing a promo or something, and I said I loved to build things, but I'm limited by the tools in my box, or the drills in my. I don't know why I don't have a full set of drill bits, but it came up while you guys were talking. It's like, oh my gosh, we have a season that is going to equip us with all kinds of tools. in our recognizing shame, responding to it, because the hiding and the turning away from and the giving into, in essence, that's like using a bigger drill bit than we need. Is just gonna fall apart.
Yeah.
And the toilet paper roll holder is gonna come off the wall. And
Right. Yeah.
that just is so. Oh, and when Curt, you said this thing's not going away. Shame is going to haunt us. But the fabulous thing is that then we become, the more we notice it, then like we notice it quicker. It's like okay, it used to take me weeks to see you, and now I see you, and no.
Right. Yeah, like take me weeks. Like it's kind of like, I didn't really know that it was in play until, my wrist is completely swollen and I can't move it.
Right.
As opposed to, wait a minute, I feel a slight bit of, something's not okay with my wrist long before, it gets to be something, immobilizing.
Yeah.
So right now, up in my bathroom, there's a broken the toilet paper holder that I
There's
have
a
got.
broken what?
Toilet paper holder
Okay.
that I've got to replace.
Use the right drill bit. Do you really?
Yeah. So it's
Okay.
It's not compelling conversation, but yes.
Right. Well, I'm gonna take this to a new level. But I'm gonna keep it in the bathroom. I'm gonna get.
Scared.
Well, nothing to be frightened of, but it does stay in the bathroom theme. This is probably 20 years ago. We've lived in our house now almost 25 years. It was 20 years ago. And the toilet seat, the screws that hold the toilet seat in, that hold that hinge in, the screw kind of, we've since redone the bathroom, but it was like the bathroom that was there when we bought the house, and the screw kind of, the nut on the screw came off, and then the toilet seat itself broke, like at the joint of the hinge, and so we just got to get a new toilet seat, right? Yeah, it's not as comfortable just to sit right on the porcelain. No. Now, if all you got to do is pee, if you're a dude and you got to pee, like it's not that big of a deal, right?
Yeah.
And so, but Amy, if you lived next door, I would have asked you to come like replace the toilet seat, because this is me and mechanical devices and fixing things of that nature. I have an allergic reaction to the thought of doing them, because I am so persuaded that I'm going to start this project, and within 10 minutes, there's probably going to be a flood in my bathroom. I'm going to start to try to replace the seat on the toilet, and my bathroom is going to flood. This is all the things. We like to say, in our audience knows I've these three older brothers of mine that one of whom, the middle of my three older brothers, received, kind of like, not by intention. This was not like Jacob and Esau, where it was, through deception. But somehow he received 99.9% of all of my father's kind of
handiness,
building handyman acumen. And there was nothing that my brother Jim couldn't do. And if you'd say, like, hey, could you make this? Like, so he had his own wood shop in his garage. And when he was coming up out of college, like in the summers, like he started to work on a construction crew. And by the time that he was like, married and having kids in his mid to late 20s and 30s, like he was a teacher in the middle of this, in the summers, like he'd build houses. This is what this is who this guy was. This was not me. And so that toilet seat sat broken.
How long?
Probably for 15 years. No, it's not. But this is about how. No, not that long. Not that long. For me, it's just like, well, I'll just go use another bathroom. I'm like, and of course, Phyllis just keeps waiting, and then we would have company over. No, we can't use that bathroom because, like, well, and then at some point, so my shame, first of all, prevents me from even trying it. And then I don't do it. And then Phyllis is rightly upset that I haven't done anything on it. And then I feel ashamed for not having done it. And the whole thing just becomes, it just becomes this, recycled, like growing, snowball of shame.
Right.
For me.
From a broken toilet.
And I just to say, it's we do have now a properly operating, and eventually I did learn that, like, you can replace a toilet seat, and it's, it's not going to engulf you, and you're not going to flood your bathroom, but this is who people have to deal with when they're dealing with me. Like, as long as it's just.
And if you do flood the bathroom, it's like, okay, it's okay. Like, it's not
Call a plumber.
fun. Call a plumber.
Right. Yeah. Call a plumber. And I get it. And there is this part. It's like, for years. I finished residency training when I was 30, 31, maybe 32. It took me, and this is not uncommon to me, but it took me probably 10, 15 years after that before I could go to a training conference. I could go and not completely believe that I was the dullest pencil in the box. Like, how is it that this person who's up on stage talking about pharmacology and talking about this medical and that, like, how is it that they are able to know so much? I don't know. Like, I don't know these things. It just continually until this part of me that's just like, I'm not smart enough. I'm not effective enough. I haven't read enough. If somebody's gonna find out. Somebody's gonna find out.
Yeah.
I remember when I was passed my boards. So you're board certified by the American Board of Neurology and Psychiatry. I passed my boards, and for the longest time, you could pass your boards. And then you're done. Like, you're past your boards. It's a one and done thing. You don't have to, like. But my cohort, when I sat for my oral exams, which is the last thing that you have to do, when I sat for my oral exams, that my cohort at that time was the last cohort who, if you passed your exam, that your oral boards that time, you were the last cohort that got to take your boards and be done with it. Everybody else who followed, you have to take your boards every 5 years.
Oh my gosh.
Now, you don't have to sit for the same kind of boards, but you have to take them. Maybe it's every 10 years. But I've never been more nervous in my life before entering into an exam. Not just because
on the line.
Not just because would I pass, but I don't want to have to keep taking them. And the reason I want to keep taking them is because I'm afraid I'm not going to know enough 10 years from now, 20 years from now.
Yeah.
It's like shame just maxes itself out. Just, so to your point, like, well, what if you didn't pass them? What if you had to pass? What if you had to take them? Like, would it be the end of the world? Like, as it turns out, no. Like, what if but,
No fun.
No.
Mm-mm.
What this is a quick thought, but Pep, when you said like shame, it's like, how can that be a good thing? And it's hard for me to wrap my head around that. Somebody said to me, and I don't remember who it was, that shame is about who you are and guilt is about something you did.
Mm-hmm.
And so the idea that shame is constructive, it is hard for me to wrap my head around that. And it's semantics, I think, because it's really a different kind of shame than the bad shame, right? So it's separating it.
Well, I think as we'll talk about, it's not even so much it's a different kind of shame is in terms of, like, it's a different felt sense in my body. Like, I feel the same, like, even when I've done something that the difference is when I sense it, what do I do in response to it?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it's not just the shame in and of itself. It's the question of, as we'll get to eventually, it's the question of, have I entered into the creation of a community of beauty and goodness, such that becomes the environment in which my shame is continually regenerated. right? So, the whole notion of having a space, having people to whom like a person to whom I know I'm going to go and I'm going to say, I'm going to name this. Okay. Before our show, Amy, we were talking about some things that and as we were sharing them, like the whole notion of you're talking about those things with us in and of itself creates a different experience of the shame.
Yes, for sure. Saying them out loud and having you guys hear them is powerful in and of itself. That right there.
Yeah.
And
And so, over the course of our time, we're each going to have stories that we'll tell.
Right.
Not just about the shame, but about what we do and what happens to it, what happens to us when we are committed to being transparent and vulnerable with one another in our shame, so that we recognize, like, look, it's going to happen again at some point, and when it does, this is the space I'm going to come to. That becomes the way in which I'm even anticipating my shame differently. Even though when I feel it at the time, like I mentioned, the woman who, the person who's like feels ashamed that they're still having to work on stuff.
Right.
And that's a big theme for us. Like, why am I still, like, why is this thing that I've been really effective, like, why does that thing still come up for me?
Yeah. I'm excited.
Yeah. It's going to be good.
Yep.
Going to be good. Thank you for today. Thanks, Amy.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys. Have a good week.
Thanks, guys.
This podcast is produced by Curt Thompson, Pepper Sweeney, and myself, Amy Chella. Audio production and editing is by Keaton Simons. Video production and editing is done by Mark Gould. If you'd like to connect with us, you can find us on social media at BeingKnownPod. If you like this podcast, tell a friend. If you love this podcast, tell everyone you know. And please like, rate, and review wherever you listen. Be well, be known.